Welcome you all to today's translation seminar organized by the Center for Translation of Hong Kong Baptist University. My name is Minhua Liu, the director of the Center for Translation. We have another very interesting topic for today's translation seminar, and I would say also a very timely and important one, particularly in this day and age when access to information means so much to all kinds of decisions we make. In this part of the world, we may not explicitly feel the difficulty in accessing the information we need. However, it is not necessarily the case for some groups of people. For example, people with disabilities, migrants, or people without the necessary education to allow them to understand the information they access. Talking to us on this very important topic, our speaker today is one of the most authoritative scholars in the field of translation studies who has done extensive research on this topic. Professor Dr. Silvia Hansen-Schirra is professor of English linguistics and translation studies at Johannes Gutenberg-Universität Mainz in Germersheim, Germany. In addition to the research on plain language and accessibility, she has also done a lot of research on specialized communication, text comprehensibility, post-editing, translation process, and translation competence. She is fellow of the Gutenberg Research College. She also leads the Translation and Cognition Center in Germersheim, which is a powerhouse that produces a lot of valuable and cutting-edge research. She is the author or co-author of close to, amazingly, 200 publications. And among her publications and related to today's topic, she is co-editor of 2 book series. The first one is Translation and Multilingual Natural Language Processing. And the second one is Easy, Plain, Accessible. The topic of her research today is evaluating the quality of easy and plain German from an addressee-oriented perspective. So without further delay, now we bring you Professor Dr. Silvia Hansen-Schirra.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a big pleasure and honor to be with you today and to give this talk. And I'm going to share my slides. There we go. Okay, now you should also see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Yes, evaluating the quality of easy and plain German from an addressee-oriented perspective. That's the title of my talk. But before I'm going to start, I would like to say a couple of words about the logos I'm using in my presentation. The first one, thanks for the nice introduction, is my university, Johannes Gutenberg-Universität, Mainz in Germany. The second one is our faculty of translation and interpreting studies. And that's quite interesting. We currently not only do research on easy and plain language, but we have also started to give courses in easy language. In Germany, administrations, politicians are forced to use easy language on their websites. So there is a market evolving in Germany for translators from standard German into easy German, and using this movement, we have started to give courses for easy German at our faculty, which is very exciting since a new field of translation practice is evolving. Then the Draco Lab, that's where we do our eye tracking and EEG studies. I will show you some of it in my talk. And the second logo is for a research group, a big project we could acquire concerning easy language, which is called leichte Sprache in German. And before I start with my talk, I would like to introduce my research group to you. You can see them here on the picture. It's a research group including 5 PhD students working on the topic easy language, and we do cognitive-oriented research, eye tracking, EEG research, studying the cognitive processes while reading easy language. So this is my research group. I would like to thank all of them, because without them, I couldn't give this talk and I wouldn't have these interesting results to present you today. This is the overview of my talk today. First, I would like to introduce the concept of easy language. Then it's necessary to introduce plain language as well and to discuss why we need it. Then for us, it's interesting from a scientific perspective to find out how we can evaluate easy and plain languages in terms of quality, but also in terms of efficiency. I will show you 2 studies on the quality and efficiency of easy and plain languages, and I will present some conclusions. And at the very end, I will show you some interesting links where you can find our book series and other interesting web pages concerning this topic. Maybe I can send you the PowerPoint presentation after the talk and you can make it available somewhere. That's probably interesting for the audience. Okay, let's start. What is easy language? I think the best way to explore easy language is to have a look at a sample text. And this is a text taken from the Australian government where they explain what the coronavirus is in easy language. And one typical thing for easy language texts is that they have a logo, a quality symbol stating that this is a text in easy language, an easy read. And if you have a look at this text, there are some typical patterns you will find in each and every easy language text, not only in English, but also in other languages. So, for example, easy language is based on the interplay between pictures and text. So a lot of pictures should be used to support the meaning of the text. Another thing is that the sentences should be quite short. Each sentence should be put on one line. Each line should start with one sentence. Let me put it the other way around. Foreign words and terminology should be avoided. If they are used, they should be explained. Easy words should be used. Easy grammar should be used. For example, active voice should be preferred. Here you can see that terms are in boldface. In German easy language, we also put negation in boldface because it's very, very important to get the meaning of the negation within a sentence. So I think if you have this text before your eyes, you can see very, very fast what easy language is about, how easy the text is, and it's quite logical that the target groups, I will talk about them in a second, will have better readability and comprehensibility with these simplified texts. So in a more formalized way, I would say easy language is a variety, a language variety with reduced complexity. It's not a language in its own, but it's a controlled language. We have in German several rule books regulating easy language. It was mainly conceptualized for written texts, but in Germany, we observe that recently also multimodal and oral applications become quite interesting. For instance, in broadcasting companies, they also have subtitling in easy, or they start having subtitling in easy language. And I also attended conferences where we had interpreting in easy language, so oral applications as well. Here are some rules for German, some sample rules. Use short sentences. You shouldn't use passive. Use a segmentation mark for long words, for compounds. There are two alternatives for German. For example, the medio point or the hyphen. You can see it in the examples, and I will talk about this segmentation later on in my research findings. Don't use genitives, explain terms and complex words, and so on and so forth. And for us as university, it's interesting because we speak of intralingual translation. In Germany, we typically have standard texts or specialized language texts, and they are translated, they are simplified into easy language. So it's intralingual translation. So easy language sees comprehensibility as a resource, and easy language is the tool of accessible communication. So this is the broader field, the broader discipline, accessible communication, which is important for many, many countries all over the world. In Germany, we have target groups with legal rights where the law constitutes that they have a right to have text in easy language. These are groups with cognitive disability, readers with dementia, deafness is an issue, aphasia, and learning difficulties. And then there are, of course, target groups which also benefit from easy language, but which do not have a legal right for it. Functional illiteracy, for example, German as second language, for example, with the waves of migration in our country, we have many people with low language proficiency who benefit from easy language texts. And then, of course, we all can be users of easy language, and we all can benefit of easy and plain languages. I will show you examples later on. Yeah, the measures to implement easy language in law as well as on the market are the following in Germany. On the federal level, there is the Federal Act on Equal Opportunities of Persons with Disabilities. So there is a federal act which says that easy language should be used in texts, in websites, which are written by administrative and public organs. And there is the Accessible Information Technology Regulation, which also says that especially websites should adhere to rules concerning accessible communication. These texts should be accessible for various groups of readers and listeners as well. And then in Germany, we have a federal system, and we have several measures to implement easy language on the federal state level as well. I mentioned that easy language is a controlled language. In Germany, we have several rule books for it, and they also represent different theories or different origins. For example, the one in the middle is the rule book by Inclusion Europe. Inclusion Europe is an European initiative which developed easy language rules for several European languages, also for German. You can see it here. More comprehensive are the other two rule books The left one is by the Netzwerk Leichte Sprache, Network for Easy Language. This is a rule book developed by people from the empowerment. So they have a lot of practical experience with the target group, and they summarize the rules in this rule book. Another one is the Duden, the rule book written by Ursula Bredel and Christiane Maas, two colleagues of mine. They formalized the rules and explained them with a linguistic background and a cognitive science background. So they formulated the rules and they explained why it is good to have this rule and how the reader can benefit from the rule. Duden is a publisher for reference books, dictionaries, and so on in German. So it's a very famous publisher for reference works. So we have these rule books, and they also have different quality measures. For example, the Duden suggests that revision should be carried out by professional translators. The other rule book by the network Easy Language says that we should have so-called Prüfgruppen, which are groups of people made up of target persons, and they should check the texts and evaluate whether the texts are easy enough, sufficiently simplified for the target reader group. So there are different mentalities, different strategies behind these rule books as well. Well, this is about Easy German. Easy languages come into play in Europe everywhere. So we also have published a handbook of easy languages in Europe, which is open access, and you can find the link later in my presentation. And we have a platform, Easy Plain Accessible, where we collect information about easy languages around the world. I will show you the link later in my presentation as well. And if you would like to join us, if you live in a country which uses easy language and it's not included in the platform, please let me know, and please, we would be very, very happy if you can send us your information. So we try to collect information about easy languages across the world and spread them as well in order to find out whether there are similarities or differences and which kind of translation strategies might be universal, and we try to learn from each other, of course. Okay, now we know what easy language is. I would like to talk about plain language as well. So if we see language as a continuum, and there is easy language, the easiest variety on the one side, and there is languages for special purposes, the most complex variety where experts communicate with each other on the other side, then there is something in between. In Germany, in every country, we have standard language, and then we have something which is easier than standard language, which might also be called in different ways. We call it plain language, einfache Sprache in German, and which is located between easy language and standard language. The problem with plain language is that we don't have strict rules for plain language. So we don't have rule books, and it's quite difficult to have a precise definition of plain language without these rules. So plain language is everything which is not easy language, which goes beyond the easy language rules, but which is probably easier than standard language. So it's really hard to define what plain language is. Important is that from easy language to language for special purposes, we have higher complexity, and in the other direction, we have enhanced comprehensibility. So the easier the variety, the more comprehensible it should be. And there are countries, for example, the Netherlands and also Finland, but also Germany. Christiane Maas suggested this variety of German, which have Easy Language Plus. Easy Language Plus well, adheres to the rules of Easy Language, but it does not adhere to the layout rules, for example, and to the picture rules of Easy Language. So the texts look very much as standard texts, but they adhere to the rules of Easy Language. So they are simplified from a linguistic point of view, but a layout and stuff like this are pretty much the same compared to the standard language. Easy Language Plus, some kind of mixture, which is in Germany, for example, used in medical contexts. So they use pictures to explain the structure of the ear or something else, they don't use the suggested picture set of Easy Language rules. But why do we need plain language? Let me give you an example. I mentioned before that we have laws on the federal state level in Germany, and there's one federal state, Schleswig-Holstein, in the north of Germany. And there the electoral authorities are to provide polling cards, polling card requests, documents for postal voting, and polling announcements in Easy Language, and the basic information on the election also in other languages. So this is the electoral law of the federal state Schleswig-Holstein. Then the responsible people there thought, well, what do we do? Shall we provide everything in two text variants, Easy Language and Standard Language? And then they decided to send only Easy Language text, because the assumption was everybody can understand the information. Easy Language is the common ground for everybody, so we are going to send around Easy Language texts for this election. My colleague Christiane Maas collected some reactions on this strategy. People received their information, read the information, and then they were quite irritated about it and sent letters to the responsible persons stating the following: I read the content of my polling card with sheer horror. This measure will hardly foster understanding for people with disabilities. When I looked at the polling information, I felt so silly, as if I were not able to understand my mother tongue. Absolutely stupid. Really nice how the German language, or better, what remains of it, is butchered more and more. New tales from Absurdistan. But who seriously believes that more people will show up for the vote only because the texts are written in idiot German? What is produced here is a mockery of the German language. So you can see something which was intended to be very, very positive and helpful and inclusive and accessible turned out to be not acceptable by the broad public. So there was a lot of criticism, a lot of stigmatization also of the texts, which the responsible people perceived. They then wrote an official report stating the following: the documents dispatched in the run-up to the elections caused irritation among many of the 2.3 million eligible voters. It's a small federal state. Easy Language has caused upheaval, incomprehension, and alienation in the population, said one of our politicians, and others said very similar things. So they understood that these very simplified, very easy to understand texts were quite problematic for the acceptability of the information material they sent around. That's why we have to be very, very careful with easy language and think about its purpose. Easy language is perceptible, it's comprehensible, but it has a risk of stigmatization. It has a risk of not being accepted by a broader public. And the problem is that not only the texts might be stigmatized, but also the target groups with the text. If we use plain language, we avoid this risk of stigmatization. Acceptability might be higher, but then we have to be very careful with the comprehensibility and the readability of the text. So plain language might be a solution depending on the purpose of the text and depending on the groups which are addressed. For some purposes, we do not have the money to have texts in standard language, in plain language, and in easy language, and we have to take very careful decisions. So that's why we need easy language for some of the target groups, but we also need plain language for others, since these texts are more acceptable and less stigmatized. But how can we measure the quality and the efficiency of these language varieties? Let's have a look. For us, well, being the head of an eye tracking lab, eye tracking seems to be the first solution to this problem. Eye tracking is a method to test the readability as well as the comprehensibility of text. So it seems to be a quite suitable method. And Houston Carpenter already in 1976 formulated the eye-mind hypothesis, which says that there is a correlation between attention and cognitive processing. So where you look at, there might be, when you look at a word, there might also be processing of this word. There is a high correlation, and we can test this via eye tracking. Eye tracking has the advantage that we have different metrics for different steps of the information processing. For example, early processing can be measured with first fixation durations and gaze duration. Late processing steps can be measured with total reading times or regression path durations. Eye tracking also has the advantage that we can include the target groups. It's addressee oriented. We invite them in the lab, or we visit them in their working places and do the study with them in their typical environments. So it's inclusive research where we can include the target groups. Let me show you an eye tracking replay of an easy language text in German, which was read, very fluently read, by one of our participants. You can, in this replay, you can see the fixations, the red dots, as well as the saccades, the lines in between the dots, symbolizing the reading behavior of the participant. And as you can see here, the text is read, then the reader jumps back to the very beginning of the text and rereads it. So we have regression paths to earlier parts in the text. And the bigger red dot is, the longer the fixation. Let me play it just once again. And with this method, we can calculate fixation counts on words, on sentences, on paragraphs. We can calculate reading times, first fixation duration on a word, total reading time of the word. So it's a very, very powerful method to evaluate reading behavior. Okay, I think that's enough. But working with the target group, especially with the target group, makes a lot of problems in the eye tracking lab. So because of physical impairments or because of attention problems, we have bad data quality when the target group is involved. We also have bad data quality in other experiments and with other reader groups, but it's a special problem with the target group of easy language because they have impairments which we have to take into account. So what you can see here is a gaze plot of an eye tracking recording, and you can see that the fixations are not properly mapped on the words. So we have an upwards drift. The fixations start where we do not have any text, so it's not properly mapped. And we have a drift to the right. So bad data quality in this case. These problems can be corrected automatically. So we can correct drifts, that's not a big problem. But as you can see here, the upwards drift is not consistent throughout the whole document, which then causes problems for the evaluation. Another example here is very curious. I haven't seen that before. The reader read this text in a zigzag pattern. So the first line he read from left to right. Then the second line he read from right to left, which we typically don't do in German texts. We only read from left to right. Then the third line he again started in the left and read to the right, which would be correct. And then again zigzag from the right to the left. I would suppose that this reader hasn't understood the text very well because information processing couldn't have taken place with this zigzag pattern. The problem is, however, that the reading data in terms of fixation count and fixation duration might be quite unconspicuous. So from the perspective of reading times and fixation counts, this data might be perfectly fine, but reading does not equal with comprehension. So we not only rely on eye tracking, we also use other methods in order to test the comprehension of the reading process. And here we combine online methods, eye tracking, recording while reading, with offline methods. And typical offline methods we use are comprehensibility ratings, recall tasks, comprehension tasks. So these are the typical methods we are going to use, and I will show some in the studies later on. Doing research, empirical research in the lab is quite difficult because there's always the trade-off between ecological validity and empirical robustness. You can imagine that having a reader with a cognitive impairment in the lab is very, very stressful for this reader, for this participant. So it's for him or her, it's a completely unusual situation. The recording is unusual. The text reading situation might be unnatural because he or she uses a monitor, which he or she wouldn't do at home. So we have a lot of effects and impacts caused by this lab situation, which has negative impacts on the ecological validity of the data. And we are not sure how much we can generalize on the basis of our results. But the more controlled a study is, the better the data are in the end. So our empirical robustness is better if the texts, the stimuli, the whole experimental situation is quite controlled. Then we can carry out statistical tests and have very, very precise data. So there's always this trade-off to take into account when doing research with the target group. Okay, let's have a look at two studies on the quality and efficiency of easy and plain texts. In the first study, we tested 3 different text variants. The first one is the original website. The second one is a plain language text, and the third one, an easy language text, the easiest form, the easiest translation of the website. And for this study, we used a multi-method approach. We carried out eye tracking with our Tobii TX300, but we tested comprehensibility with a recall task. So we asked the participants to recall what they have read in order to see how much they understood of the information. Then we asked them to fill out a comprehensibility rating for us, and we had a questionnaire concerning the metadata of the participants. We involved 4 different groups in our study with 30 participants per group. The first one was elderly people without any impairments. But they are supposed to have problems with texts which are written very complex, in a very complex way, and with very small letters. So we just found it interesting to test this group because it's a growing group in Germany. We included people with cognitive impairments and people with low German proficiency, which means migrants that just arrived in Germany. And we had a control group of students just to have tertium comparationis for our data. Then we used the 3 text variants. For this study, we cooperated with our ministry, with our social ministry in our federal state. They wanted to test their websites, and we translated them into plain language and into easy language according to the rules we have for easy language and according to the descriptions on plain language which exist for German. The texts look like this. They are in German. I know that many of you do not read German, so that's not very important. I will show you the results later on. And they are published in Gutenberg 2020 in our book series, which I will show you later on. But first, let's have a look at the different text corpora. Let's analyze the corpora. So from a corpus linguistic point of view, we can investigate text complexity with corpus linguistic means. And that's what we did in this analysis. We calculated type token ratio, a measure for word redundancy. We calculated lexical density, compound density in the texts, phrase length, average sentence length, and the Flash index, which is a readability index for texts. And if you have a look at the figures, you can see that the most complex text is the website in terms of type token, in terms of lexical density. I will speak about lexical density in a minute, but the website is most complex in terms of type token ratio, compound density, phrase length, as well as sentence length. The easiest text variant is the easy language one, which, well, is not a surprise. The most readable one is the easiest language one. Here, the higher, the better readable. The website has the worst performance. Lexical density, that's very interesting, is higher in easy language compared to the original website. And there's an explanation for that. In easy language, terms, foreign words have to be explained. And even if the amount of terms is reduced in easy language text, we need more lexical material in order to explain the remaining terms. So in terms of lexical density, easy language is quite complex because of these explanations we have to include in the text. But concerning the other features, easy language performs quite well. and has proven to be the easiest variety, which we used for our eye tracking study. Okay, now let me show you our results. What can we see here? These are the results for the comprehensibility rating. So we asked the participants to rate the texts from very complex, which was 1, to very easy, which was 4 or 5. So the higher the value, the better the rating, the more comprehensible was the text perceived by the participant. And you can see the results for the control group at the bottom left, for the elderly people, for the people with low German proficiency, and for the people with cognitive impairments on the right. And then you also, in this regression, statistical regression analysis, you also have the differentiation between the different text translations. The black one is the original website. The plain language text is in red, and the easy language text is in green. And what has proven here is that the original website performed worst. So the rating results for the original websites were lower compared to the plain language texts and the easy language texts. Easy language texts were rated the highest, so they were perceived as the easiest form of information they had read in this experiment. Another interesting thing is that we do not have significant results, significant differences for the control group of students and the elderly people. So there are no significant results between these 3 text variants, but we have significant results for the group of people with low German proficiency. So they benefited most from the easy language texts, the migrants, and we have slight advantages for the group with cognitive impairments. They also had a benefit from the easy language text, but the statistical significance was very, very, very marginal. A very similar pattern for the recall results. So this was the method where we asked the participants to recall what they have read. And here again, the group, our control group, performed better than the elderly people, but they had no statistical significant differences between the 3 text variants. Again, people with low German proficiency profited most from easy language, and people with cognitive impairments also had an advantage of the easy language text, but again with marginal statistical results. And you can see that they had in general very poor recall results concerning all 3 texts. And then here are the results for the total reading time. Here, the higher the reading time, the longer the participants needed to read the text, of course. And here we can see that the original website in standard German performed worst. Again, for the group, for our control group, for the group with low German proficiency, and also slightly for our group with cognitive impairment, easy language performed best. So it was the text variant which was best readable. Here, for our elderly people, we found irritation effects for the easy language texts. They did not benefit from the easy language texts. Why was that the case? They reported that they had problems with the medio point. They didn't understand what this dot should mean in the middle of one word. And they were irritated by the pronoun rule. In easy language, pronouns are forbidden because they are quite ambiguous and not easy to resolve. And instead of pronouns, there are a lot of repetitions in the text. And our group of elderly people reported irritation effects concerning the repetitions. And that's what we saw on the eye tracking as well. So that's interesting. But in conclusion to this study, we can say that we had better rating results, recall results, and better readability for easy language texts, except for the elderly people with their irritation effects. But people with low language proficiency and people with cognitive impairments benefit the most. Okay, that was one study. Another study deals with the compound segmentation in German. German is very productive with compound segmentation. We have a lot of compounds which are very, very, very long. And easy language rules suggest that these compounds should be segmented in order to optimize the readability of these compounds. So we can, and then we have diverging rules. The network easy language suggests to use the hyphen with capitalized second part of the word. You can see it here. Lachkrampf, which is my example on this slide, means laughing fit, but the word Krampf in German can also mean cramp or spasm. So laughing fit, which can also mean, well, if you segment it or if you decompose the word, then it can also mean laughing and spasm or laughing and cramp. But the compound means laughing fit, just to make that very clear. And the rules by the network suggest that we should use the hyphen with capitalized K in this case. The rules suggested by the Duden, by Predel-Maas, suggest that we should use the medio point, the little dot in between, which we all know from dictionaries and syllable segmentation in dictionaries. And with the medio point, the K of the word of the second part is not capitalized. And this is the unsegmented word compound, which we would use in standard German. So we selected 55 compounds and we used 3 randomized variants with hyphen, with medio point, and without any segmentation. And we also included distractors in this eye tracking study. The method was eye tracking on the one hand and a text image mapping, a text picture mapping with 4 alternatives. I will show you an example in a second. So the comprehensibility task was to tip on the correct picture, which should represent the compound. It was a very small pilot study. Sometimes it's quite hard to find enough participants for our easy language groups, target groups. So this was a pilot study. We tested 5 women from a German course, adult literacy training. And they were more than 10 years in Germany, but their official German knowledge was still quite low. So the official certificate they should receive in the course was A1. That's the European reference frame for language skills. We took the stimuli also from the same language proficiency class, A1, the vocabulary, as well as the images. And the example, I've already talked about it. And this was the setup. The participants read the word, Lachkrampf in this case, with hyphen, with capitalized K. And then they had to click on the picture, which represents the Lachkrampf, the laughing fit. And the correct picture would be at the left top. The other one would be a cramp in the leg, and the other one would be a spasm. And then there was one picture which should show, I don't know, I haven't understood this compound. So this was our comprehensibility task, picture assignment. Let's have a look at the results. The first slide here shows us the fixation duration on the compounds in seconds. And our control group is represented in red. And you can see that they had only very, very, very little reading times. So they only needed very, very short time to read these compounds, and there were no statistical significant differences between hyphen, medial point, and no segmentation. The blue bars represent the target groups, the target group. And as you can see here, the compound without segmentation produces the longest reading times. So they need a lot of time to read and probably also to understand this compound. The hyphen performs better than no segmentation, but the best performance we can see with the medial point. This results in the shortest fixation durations for our target group. So the medial point performs best, followed by the hyphen, and no segmentation performed worst. Let's have a look at the error rates. You can see them here. Again, the control group is represented in red. And we can see the hyphen compound in the left, in the middle, the unsegmented compound, and the medial point on the right. And you can see here that the control group performed worst with the not segmented, with the unsegmented variant. There was no difference between the hyphen and the medial point compound. But our target group in blue, they produced the most errors with the hyphen variant. So the hyphen segmentation even performs worse than unsegmented compounds here in the middle. Best performance, again, we can observe with the medial point. So for comprehension, we can say that the medial point performs best, followed by the unsegmented compound, and the hyphen compound performed worst. Why is this the case? Let's have a look at my example with the hyphen. You can see it here. Lachkrampf, again, segmented by the hyphen and capitalized K. And what you can see here is a heat map of our eye tracking recording. The red areas symbolize areas where they looked most of the time. Green symbolizes fewer fixations and so on. And the interesting thing here is that when the participants read the compound, they focused the second part of the compound, the word Krampf, which means cramp or spasm. So the activation in the mental lexicon went wrong. They didn't activate the whole compound, laughing fit, but they activated the word spasm, the second part of the compound. And you can then see it in the picture task. This would be the correct one where the two men laughed, but we find more fixations on the cramp in the leg and also several fixation areas with the man with the spasm. So the mental activation went wrong in this case, and we try to explain it not only by the hyphen, but especially by the capitalized K. So this word is in special focus and triggers the activation which might not be correct. That's quite interesting, and we can see it in our data. So the conclusions on this part, we find better readability and comprehensibility for the medial point, but a higher error rate for the hyphen. So our recommendations for the rule books would be, please do not use the hyphen. It's quite well readable, but it causes errors, which we do not want. It causes incorrect activations in the mental lexicon, which we do not want. And again, people with low language proficiency benefited a lot from this segmentation compared to our control group of students. For those, we didn't find any differences. Okay, my general conclusions. We have learned that easy and plain languages can be important tools for accessible communication. We have learned about research methods with which we are able to evaluate the quality and efficiency of easy and plain languages. But what we still need is more empirical evidence concerning easy language rules. In my studies today, I only showed a general text comparison in the first study and the segmentation rule, but there are a lot of different rules which can be tested and for which we do not really have empirical evidence whether they are efficient or not. And we need more empirical evidence for other languages. Of course, our working language is German, but it would be quite interesting to compare easy German to other easy language varieties all over the world. For example, other languages which might have a rich morphology might also be segment their compounds, or they don't, like in Finland, and it's would be quite interesting to compare these different rules and reading behaviors. Then it would be good to have standards for easy languages across countries and languages. For example, to have an ISO standard which can be adopted to different countries, to different easy languages, and then we have universal rules which can be compared. That would be quite interesting, and I know that there are initiatives on their way concerning standardization of easy and plain languages. And what we still need is research on the acceptability of easy and plain languages. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we need plain language in order to avoid stigmatization, but we do not know enough about acceptability of these language variants, and this also has to be tested. And yeah, I'm coming to the end. I would like to show you the studies I talked about today. They are published in our book series, and most of the English books are available open access. So please feel free and have a look. And we also, together with Christiane Maas in Hildesheim and her research group, we built up a platform, easyplainaccessible.com, where you can find a lot of resources concerning easy and plain languages. For instance, there are materials such as talks, slides. There's also a dictionary where you can find terminology on different kinds of impairments and stuff like this. There are videos of researchers on this platform, projects, and so on. I hope it's quite interesting for some of you. And there's this website I mentioned before, Around the World, where we try to collect information about easy languages around the world. And when you click on one of the countries, you get the information concerning the country, the situation in the legal situation in the country concerning easy languages, the target groups, the application scenarios, and so on. And again, I mentioned that before, if you live in a country which is not represented, or if you would like to add something, please feel free to contact me, send me your information, send me your feedback. We are very, very happy. We would be very happy to include it on our platform. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm open. I would like to open the floor for questions or feedback or comments.
Thank you so much, Professor Hansen-Schirra. This is amazing. Your talk is truly enlightening. So much food for thought, and the findings of your studies are all so interesting. And thank you also for providing us with so many useful resources. We will now entertain questions from our audience. You can type your questions in the chat box, but we would love to hear you and see you. So if you can just unmute yourself before asking your questions, that would be great. Let's see. So probably while we're waiting for questions to come in, I have so many questions. Maybe I can ask one of my many questions. My first question is, about your around the world platform. This is so meaningful. I don't know whether any of the Chinese speaking regions is included in your platform right now.
No, that's why I asked you before or in advance of the talk. We would love to include more languages and countries and varieties, but we are not aware of all of them. So we try to make people aware of this platform and invite them to join us. So please feel free to send me your information. We have a template. So if you have input for our platform, just let me know and I can send you the template for the countries.
Wonderful. Let's see. I think we have our first question in the chat box. Many thanks for this fantastic presentation. It certainly, it certainly helped a lot to understand the difference between easy and plain language. Thank you for your interesting presentation. You mentioned courses in easy language at your university. Do you have more information on that?
Yes, maybe I can start with the difference between easy and plain language. What I haven't mentioned so far is that in Germany, we focus on easy language. The law tells us that we should use easy language. There are, of course, other countries which use plain language. I mean, from the English-speaking world, from the US, they had the plain language movement, and they started out with plain language. That's quite interesting. They, for easy language, they use the term easy to read. So if you hear the term easy to read, that's what I would call easy language. The problem with easy to read is that it focuses on written texts. As soon as we started using easy language in subtitles for multimodal applications and in interpreting, you cannot call it easy to read anymore. So that's why we use the cover term easy language, just to make that clear. Yeah, concerning our courses, in Germany, we have at the University of Hildesheim, not my university, we have a master's course on accessible communication. So there is a master's course focusing on accessible communication, and there you can also learn how to translate into easy language. At my university, we have a module in our bachelor's program, which includes translating from German standard language into easy German. And we teach the students the rules, but also translation strategies. The problem with easy language is the following. You can, of course, apply all the rules and then you have a very easy text. But then the text gets longer and longer because you have to explain and you include examples and stuff like this. And this is not feasible for the target group. Therefore, you also have to reduce information. And here come translation strategies into play. And this trade-off between adding information in order to explain contents and reducing information, which might be too detailed, is not always easy. So that's what we teach the students, and that what we try to make very clear. Talking about easy language in subtitles or easy language interpreting is, of course, even more difficult, but because here the constraints of easy language and the constraints of subtitling are in conflict with each other, and that's even more complicated, and also more complicated to teach. But that's in Germany, there's a very big market evolving for easy language translation, and we try to address the needs and demands of the market. Yes.
Let's see. There's another question. It's very interesting talk. Thank you. Could you show the contact information again? I did not get it in time. My question is that Chinese is very different from German and English. So is it possible to make a universal rule, make universal rules for plain language?
Let me put it this way. I think that some of the rules are universal. Use short languages, use short words, use short phrases, do not use complicated phrases, stuff like this. But I think that we still need language-specific rules. That will always be the case. But from a purpose-oriented view, I think the rules are quite functional and can be compared and can be quite universal. If you have a look at the, yes, I'm going to share my slides once again. If you have a look at the I mentioned that at the very beginning. We have this handbook. Can you see that? Yes. The handbook of easy languages in Europe. I mean, it's only Europe. It's not an international project. But still, there are plenty of languages in Europe, and the book is in English. And here you can compare the rules. You can also compare the target groups, because the question is, are the target groups universal? And the target groups are on the one hand heterogeneous, but they might be quite different comparing different countries. So that's interesting, and you can find information on different countries in this handbook. And this is open access on our platform. So please feel free to have a look. This is the website of the platform. It's very easy. Just type in easy-plain-accessible.com. And there you can find the book series, and from there you can have open access to the books which are available open access. The German books are not all of them are available open access. I'm sorry about that. It's quite expensive in Germany to publish open access, and we tried to do it with the English books to make them available for the broad public, but it's quite expensive. And this is my contact address.
Thank you. I just want to remind our audience that the recording of this lecture, just like any other translation seminar talks, will be put on the center's website. So you can, if you want to revisit the content of this talk, probably in a week or so, you will see the recording of this lecture. Silvia, we have another question in the chat box here. Could someone just take the module on translation when translating from standard to easy language?
You mean someone who is not enrolled in our study program? No, that's not possible, but we have training courses for non-students. Unfortunately, currently they are in German. But if there is an interest for training courses for non-students who are not enrolled in our department, we can talk about that, because it would be quite easy to offer them in English. So maybe just contact me via email and we can talk about it, and we can see what we can do.
Mm-hmm. All right. The next question. Let me see. I think this is the next one. Yes. Thank you, Silvia, for your interesting talk. I have a question for you. I believe it would be more interesting if you have included more complex websites as your experimental stimuli in order to distinguish plain language with the original one. What is your opinion about that?
More complex websites. Well, you can always play around with experimental materials. Our experiment was built in cooperation with the social ministry, and the original websites were quite complex. For example, in terms of morphology, we had a lot of very complex compounds in this website. But of course, we could have used more complex websites, and we could have used other genres or other areas of interest, for example, medical texts. And in fact, we are currently carrying out studies with medical texts. We have PhD students who work on the comparison of French and German. So there are other projects we have just initiated. But of course, the more complex the original website or the original text is, the bigger the benefit should be for the easy language users. I completely agree. But another interesting thing is subtitling or literary texts, because they are complicated or complex with respect to other things, and they are also quite interesting. We carried out a study with Ginitske, who is in the audience, who should be in Norway. Hello to Norway. We carried out a study on subtitling, which was quite interesting because the subtitling guidelines are in conflict with the easy language guidelines, and it's interesting to observe translation patterns for subtitling.
Wonderful. Well,
hello.
Yes. Yes,
can I
please.
ask a question? Yes, yeah.
Absolutely, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting talk, right? But very thought-provoking, I should say. Yeah, maybe very first time for me to be exposed to such a very case studies, right? So yeah, as you said, so I have a very quick question. That is, just you emphasize this easy or plain language just as applicable to it is for writing, for text, right? So my question that in China we are now encouraged to be easy in communication, using in communication, but usually we say to communicate in a colloquial way, that in order. So can I understand that that your easy or plain language is can be understood or say can be equated as maybe the language, I mean the style of the language in the colloquial style include. So can I simply understand this way? Yeah. Thanks, Hansen. Right.
Yeah, that can be in the same direction. I think that's an interesting aspect I haven't thought about, I must confess, before. Typically in Germany, oral communication in easy language is interpreting. So if there is a conference, for example, organized by the social ministry, there are interpreters in a booth, and they interpret from standard German into easy German, which is really, really innovative. We haven't had that before. And they try to adhere to these rules. So they try to be very, very strict with the given rules, which were formulated for written texts originally. So that's an interesting paradigm change, I think, anyway. Talking about colloquial language and spontaneous oral language. That's an interesting aspect. I haven't thought about it, but I will do so. And I think that might go in the same direction. Yes, I think you can combine it. Why not? I mean, colloquial language is in many cases simplified. And of course, you find simplified constructions in colloquial and oral language in general. It would also be a nice empirical study to investigate this kind of language you just described to us. So if you can make some recordings, please send them to me, and then we can see what we do about it.
Yeah. Thanks for your responses. So that is yours. Easy one. Plain language is more than just a style, or this what. So that I just want to be to be a little bit more specific in this connection. So more than just in formulation. So it is there are other considerations rather than just style, right? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are other considerations of than style. Okay. Silvia, the next question is, do you think different classes, or even gender among Germans themselves contribute to the results of your study?
We included gender, of course, in our metadata questionnaire, and we didn't find effects triggered by gender. But of course, that very much depends on the texts and on the contents of the text. There might be texts and situations. I wouldn't exclude finding effects triggered by gender. Class, I think class has an effect, because class might have an effect on the reading proficiency of the participants, on the reading habits of the participants, and that might have an effect. In our statistical analyses, we typically calculate the average reading behavior of each participant, and in these regression analyses you have seen, personal reading patterns are excluded from the results. So, but if we would like to know whether class might have an effect, then this should be also included in the questionnaire and included by other questions concerning reading behavior and stuff like this. And I think that might have an effect on the reading patterns. Yeah, I think in our case, in the study I presented, class was quite similar across the groups, and so we couldn't find any effects. But if you differentiate between different groups, you can find effects here. I can imagine that.
Now, Silvia, if I may ask a follow-up question about this, I wonder what is the rationale behind studying gender and also class? And for example, when you include class, did you differentiate it with, for example, the level of education? I mean, are we talking about two different constructs here? Yeah.
Good question. Yeah. Typically in our studies, that's only a side effect, or that's only a byproduct we are investigating. We haven't carried out, we in my lab haven't so far carried out studies focusing on class and gender. Yeah, so that's an interesting point for future research, I think, and that's an interesting point where we can discuss how to operationalize it. That's not an answer to your question, because I do not have the answer, but I think that's really an interesting perspective for future research.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually intrigued by the question about gender, because I have not really thought about when it comes to reading different levels of language, gender could be a issue, but I may be wrong. So I was just wondering, so probably the participant who asked that question can further clarify your thinking behind asking about gender. Our next question in the chat box is, I would like to know what your criteria for selecting the compounds for the comprehension text, Did you target intentionally at compounds that contain ambiguous parts?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, that depends. In the first study I presented, we also included compounds, and these were authentic texts by the ministry, so we included the compounds of these texts. We haven't selected or controlled for the compounds. In the second study I presented, we controlled the compounds, and this was only a pilot study. My PhD student, Silvia Dylan, just published her thesis on compound segmentation. She very, very carefully selected different kinds of compounds, opaque compounds, transparent compounds, compounds that are ambiguous, compounds that are lexicalized, and she constructed the stimuli having all these different combinations of compounds in mind, and controlled the whole experiment for these differences as well. So in this pilot study, that was a bit difficult because we only had 5 participants and we couldn't include a large amount of compounds. But in the PhD thesis of Silvia Dylan, which is just published, there we could include more compounds and could differentiate between the different kinds of compounds. That's very important, in fact, yes. And there we had compounds also. We also contrasted compounds with 2 parts, with 3 parts. So we also contrasted the complexity of the compounds.
Our next question is also about the methodology. What is the empirical robustness? What are its pros and cons? May I ask the participant who asked this question, did you mean the definition of empirical robustness, or you're asking about the empirical robustness of Professor Hansen-Schirra's studies, the study she presented in her talk?
I can answer both. I mean,
okay, yes.
In my talk, I presented one very authentic study with the authentic texts where we couldn't control for linguistic features. And I presented a very controlled study where we selected, focused on compounds and selected the compounds. So the criticism concerning the compound study is, well, nobody only reads isolated compounds. So compounds typically occur in contexts and in texts. And having such a controlled study, we do not have the impact or the effect of the context on the compounds. So reading does not mean reading single words, but we read whole sentences, whole texts, whole contexts within a given situation. In the second study, they only read compounds in the lab, and then they had to click on the correct picture. This is not what we do in our real lives, but this gives us a very solid basis for our empirical research. So the eye tracking results on this compound are very, very precise because we present the compound in big letters. It's the only word on the screen. So even if there are drifts to the right or upwards, that's not problematic because we can map the drifts on the word and correct these problems. So our empirical situation is quite easy to handle, and we have very solid empirical results. That's what I mean with empirical robustness. The mapping of the fixations onto the word is quite easy. The mapping on the picture is easy, and we can then do statistical tests and calculations. But that's not what we do in real life when we read text and when we are faced with compounds. That's the criticism. The authentic text, that's what we do in real life. We visit the website of the social ministry, we read the text. In this text, there is an uncontrolled number of compounds, their length and complexity is not controlled. They occur at the beginning of a sentence or at the end of a sentence. So for us, the empirical situation is quite fuzzy, but that's authentic reading, what's happening. And there's this trade-off between ecological validity, authentic situation, and empirical validity, empirical robustness of our calculations. And I presented two different studies. The first one was quite authentic, the second one rather controlled, and the empirical robustness was better. The empirical validity was better in the second study because it was so controlled. I hope that clarifies the pros and cons of these different scenarios. If we have the time, we try to combine both. In the PhD project of Silvana Dylan, I've just mentioned her. She had a lot of time in her PhD project, and she carried out word-based studies as well as studies within context. So she had empirical validity on the one hand and combined it with authentic reading on the other hand. And that's the ideal match. That's how to combine both and have the pros of both settings. But in some cases, for pilot studies or in master's projects, master's thesis, we do not have the time to have such a combination of different settings.
Fascinating. I was reminded that there was a participant who raised his or her hand, but I'm sorry about that. I was focusing on the chat box, and now I no longer see the raised hand. So if you can just unmute yourself and ask your question, that will be fine. Okay, no. Okay, let me read the next question in the chat box. This is not a question, this is a comment, Silvia. Your presentation has been extremely interesting, especially to get to know what is going on with easy and plain language in Germany. I'm from Argentina, where there are several initiatives in this regard. I'm currently attending a plain language diploma in the Universidad del El Salvador in Buenos Aires. So I will share some of the information and conclusions you presented here with my classmates and professors. Thanks again.
Thank you. Please feel free to do so.
The next question is regarding easy language and subtitling. Have you developed any studies in this field? Can you recommend any books or articles about this topic?
Yes, we investigated easy language subtitling, but so far only on a corpus-based basis. So we evaluated subtitles, transformed them into easy language. We here also work together with a broadcasting company in Germany, and they also tried to implement easy language subtitles, and we kind of scientifically evaluate the whole process. But so far my own work is based on corpus-based investigations of easy language and subtitling together with Jean Nietzsche, who I mentioned before. recommend any books and articles about this topic. We have just published our study on subtitling, and just contact me via email and I can send it to you. I think that's the easiest method to do so. On the other hand, there are some initiatives ongoing. I think there is more to come in the very, very recent future. There are some, Franz Pöschaker might know about it. He's in the audience as well. Hi, Franz. There are some handbooks in development, and they are concerned with accessible communication in general. And I mean, subtitling is a special focus of these handbooks. So there's more to come in the recent future.
If I might just add, and thank you, Silvia, for your brilliant presentation. These fields all have their own needs. I think subtitling is a fascinating specialization that requires further research. And then you've several times mentioned interpreting, which is another can of worms, because the methodology of eye tracking, for instance, would not easily be available. So we need to think of some different methodological approaches to focus on easy to understand language in spoken communication as well. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. I fully agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See, our next question here is also about the methodology. Have you investigated the interaction effects between target groups and text variants?
Yes. We investigate the interaction effects, and there are interactions, especially between people with migration background and easy and plain language variants, and also between people with cognitive impairments and those two variants. For the others, we didn't find any interactions.
Okay. The next question is regarding the zigzag reading. I'm sure this participant is referring to the eye tracking study. Does it have to do with the fact that German verbs come at the end of the sentence? And is it a key to understanding its meaning and context? I'm a native Brazilian Portuguese speaker, and this is not a feature in the structure of my mother language. If I would undergo this eye tracking test, I would also zigzag when I read the sentences. In German written translation, and especially in interpreting in general, one has to check or wait for the end of the sentence. That is for the verb to make a proper translation and interpreting.
I completely understand what you mean. In Germany, we have this verb final structure in subordinate clauses, and the explanation would be perfect. I totally agree. But this participant was the only one in my whole eye tracking career who, for German, had this zigzag pattern. And for all the other participants, when reading subordinate clauses with final verb position, we didn't find these patterns. So they typically read from left to right, very, very straight. They jump within the text, have regressions, but this very straight zigzag pattern, that's not typical. We had a closer look at the comprehension tests, and we used this recall tests within this study. And this special participant didn't understand anything. He couldn't recall anything of the text. So our explanation is that he was asked to read this text, and he knew in advance that there will be questions concerning the text. And I think he might have been under an enormous pressure to fulfill this task. So he did the best and simulated reading behavior, and he jumped around in a zigzag pattern but he didn't understand anything. So that was not meaningful reading. We had perfect reading times, no unconspicuous counts, fixation counts. That was fine, but he couldn't recall anything, and I think that was dysfunctional reading, in fact, for this special participant. For other languages, we of course found different reading patterns. I mean, for Arabic readers, they typically read from right to left. We found other reading patterns, but for German, I have never seen such a reading pattern.
Interesting.
And with the poor performance in the recall task, I would interpret that this was dysfunctional reading.
Of course, Silvia, I'm sure this is how you interpreted, this reading behavior. I don't know whether, I mean, I know that you included so many different methods in your study, including filling out a questionnaire. I don't know whether when it comes to reader perception, whether it is necessary for example, to interview them, so that they can fully articulate, their experience in reading a text. So, for example, what you just described in this reader, whether it was indeed the case where he or she that was exactly what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite interesting. In these studies with the target groups of easy language, we cannot use our established methods. So a comprehensibility rating, for example, cannot be done with paper pencil. It can also not be done with the mouse or with further reading tasks. So what we do typically is to present these tasks orally, and they can also answer them orally. We record it and transcribe it later on. In order to increase the reading amount and not to demotivate them. So reading motivation is a critical issue for these target groups, and we have to adopt our methods according to the target groups. That's a critical issue to working with these working with easy language and the target groups. And of course, our explanations, what they have to do, and the questionnaire and the signature, that's all explained in easy language. We cannot present them our own texts in standard German. They do not understand them. So our lab documentation texts are all translated in easy language, and the target group, of course, can use the English, the easy language text and sign the easy language text in order to give their consent to the study.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In Germany, we also have, of course, to apply for an ethical votum. So we have to describe the whole project, send it to our ethics committee, and need their positive answer in order to carry out the study.
Was it a difficult process to apply for this ethical review?
No, if you are quite honest and be very explicit with the methods and the time, and what we had to do is we had on the basis of the feedback of the ethical votum, we had to change our experimental design. For example, in our PhD projects, we wanted to have well, a compound reading, a context reading, another and another and another. And it took too much time to do this on one day. So we had 2 or 3 days of recording just to keep the whole experiment feasible for the target group. Mm-hmm. And that was basically based on the ethics votum, that they said, well, that takes too long. That's not, the target group will not be motivated for such a long time. They will not be able to keep their attention high for such a long time. And then we changed our procedure.
I don't see any more questions. So when we are waiting for more questions to come in, I do have another question. So this, your collaboration with the ministry, social ministry, I don't know whether there was an initiative of the ministry, or they needed some persuasion from your research group.
Yeah, we are, well, our federal states are quite small in Germany, and we are in close contact with the ministries. And when they visited us at a conference, we had a poster session at a conference, and we presented our eye tracking study there. And then they visited our poster and asked us whether we can evaluate their texts. And so that was in very close contact. And so that was, and then we met and discussed the options and created this project, which then ended in Silke Gutermuth's PhD project. But it was kind of their initiative on this conference, yeah.
Amazing, just really amazing. It's almost perfect, you know, when it comes to this, this awareness on the part of the people, who basically have a lot of say, in this, in making policies or regulations in this aspect.
Yeah, but I think at least in Germany, politicians, ministries, public institutions, but also medical care, they have a big problem making themselves comprehensible to their target groups. And in times where participation, inclusion are such important values in a society, they have to think about their text practices, and they have to improve their texts and make them comprehensible to, well, the broad public on the one hand, but also to special target groups on the other hand. And I think that's quite important. And this raising the awareness shows that there's a lot to do. There's still a lot to do.
How about the legal field? You're talking about medical. How about the legal?
In Germany, the laws only hold true for administration and public domains. So for the medical domain, if they translate their text into easy language, they do it they do it by themselves because of their own motivation. They want to make them comprehensible, and they want to engage with the target group. And I think that's quite supportable. And we cooperate with the medical sector as well.
Mm-hmm.
But since they are not forced to use easy language, they, in most of the cases, use plain language because it's easier to translate, and they can use their own pictures, and that's easier for them. But that's also fine from my perspective, because that's a very good step in the right direction.
Yes, yes. I'm also wondering about, with English as the lingua franca, whether there's actually a natural trend. I'm not talking about German right now. I'm talking about English. For English become easier or simpler.
Language change. That's what that's what some people in Germany are afraid of. That due to initiatives such as easy and plain languages, the general standard language becomes too easy. I'm not sure. That would be a nice corpus-based study, a diachronic corpus-based study, to see whether English becomes easier during the time. I'm not sure. I mean, we have a lot of specialized language, and for English being lingua franca also means that constructions from other languages are imported into English, which might make it more complex at various in various respects. I don't know. That's a nice corpus study.
Well, talking about that, is there any research done by your group or by other researchers on borrowed language or borrowed terms?
That's in fact a big issue for German. How much English is borrowed from how much is borrowed from English into the German language. So we have a lot of Anglicisms and English structures which found their way in the German language, and there is a lot of research, in fact, going on corpus-based. In fact, one of my PhD students works on the perception of Anglicisms by German pupils. So she carried out an eye tracking study in schools and compared different ages and also different acquisition ages for English and their proficiency concerning Anglicisms. That's quite interesting because many Anglicisms are used in oral German, and kids use them as well when talking about them. But if they read them, if they see them in a written text, they are not able to read them and to understand them. And that's quite interesting. And that, of course, depends on the frequency of the Anglicism, on the acquisition age, on different conditions. And one of my PhD students has just carried out her data collection. And that's an interesting topic, yes.
On children. On children,
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. That was exactly the next question I wanted to ask you. You know, because in your studies, the studies you presented in your talk today, we're talking about adults, right? Adults,
Yes.
different groups of adults. But now we're talking about children too, when it comes to reading easier language or standard language. That's very interesting.
Yes, Silvana Dylan, I mentioned her before, worked with children with learning disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And she also worked with children and easy language. So yeah, there are some studies testing the reading behavior of children and different influence and factors such as easy language or Anglicisms or stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see. I don't think there are any more questions in the chat box. So audience, if you just want to unmute yourself or type in your questions, is there, let's see.
There was one comment by Heike Holthaus.
Yes.
Was it you who asked concerning the courses, the training courses? Just send me a message. You mentioned that you are a German speaker. Just send me a message and we can handle out how you can participate.
Thank you. Wonderful. All right. Do we have any other questions?
I would be very much interested whether there are new initiatives concerning easy language, whether countries start initiatives, write new rule books. To all of you, please let us know. We would like to include you. We would like to join you and include your information in our platform. Please just let me know. We are very curious about easy language initiatives around the world.
Silvia, I have a PhD student who is doing, she's just beginning, but she has some background in medicine, and she is doing her dissertation on the labels, so the instructions on over-the-counter medicine, whether those instructions are easy to read and whether those instructions can be made easier, for people who rely, because we're talking about over-the-counter medicine, you cannot really rely on the doctor's suggestions or comments. So basically you have to read those instructions to understand, whether those medicine works for you or is best for you. So she's working on that. She's still thinking about her methodology, but so your talk will be so inspiring for her. I think she's in the audience. So we'll let you know. We'll let you know how her research progresses.
Yes, and please let me know if I can help. So
Yes, yes.
let's stay in contact.
That would be great. That would be great. Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, if not, I would like to thank you again, Silvia, for such a fascinating talk. I myself have learned so much, and definitely I'm going to revisit your talk and then just try to access those links, the resources you have provided us. And I would also like to thank our audience for your interesting questions, for your participation. And again, the recording of this talk will be available in about a week on the website of the center, with many recordings in the past 20 years. And we certainly look forward to seeing you again at the next translation seminar. Thank you again, Silvia.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.